The celestial gateway station floated in the darkness of space like a massive wheel of light. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy lived and worked inside its metal walls. Ships came and went every hour, carrying diplomats, traders, and travelers from worlds so different that some breathed methane while others needed acid baths to survive. The station was neutral ground, a place where old enemies could meet and new friends could be made. Doyen wiped the sweat from his forehead and adjusted his tool belt. He had been working in the diplomatic wing for 3 hours, fixing a broken environmental control panel. The air here was kept cooler than in other sections because the Velkari delegates preferred it that way. He didn't mind the cold. It reminded him of winter mornings back on Earth. The hallway was wide and decorated with symbols from different alien cultures. Crystal sculptures caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the polished floor. Everything here was expensive and beautiful. Doyen felt out of place in his stained work uniform, but someone had to keep the fancy equipment running. He heard footsteps and looked up from his work. A figure was walking down the hall, struggling with a large metal container. The person was small and thin, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Doyen recognized the species immediately. Velkari. They looked almost human except for the bioluminescent patterns that traced across their skin like living tattoos. The Velkari was a young female, probably in her early 20s if he was guessing their ages right. She wore a simple gray uniform that marked her as a servant. The container she carried was nearly as big as she was, filled with cleaning supplies that sloshed and rattled with each step. Doyen watched as she took another step forward. Her legs were shaking. The container tilted dangerously to one side. Then she stumbled. Her foot caught on the edge of a floor panel and she pitched forward. The container slipped from her grip and began to fall. Without thinking, Doyen dropped his tools and ran. His boots slapped against the floor as he covered the distance in seconds. He caught the container just before it hit the ground, his arms straining under the sudden weight. The Velkari girl had fallen to her knees. She looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. Her skin patterns flickered rapidly, which Doyen had learned meant distress in her species. "Are you okay?" Doyen asked, setting the container down gently. She didn't answer. She just stared at him like he had done something completely unexpected. Her breathing was quick and shallow. Doyen extended his hand to help her up. She flinched away from it. At that moment, several other aliens walked past. A tall insectoid being with 4 arms didn't even slow down. A pair of floating jellyfish creatures drifted by without a glance. None of them looked at the fallen servant or the human helping her. They simply continued on their way as if nothing had happened. "Please," Doyen said softly. "Let me help you." Slowly, hesitantly, the Velkari girl reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold. Doyen pulled her to her feet as gently as he could. Now that she was standing, he could see the dark circles under her eyes and the way her uniform hung loose on her frame. She was much too thin. "Thank you," she whispered in accented but clear English. Her voice was barely audible. "What's your name?" Doyen asked. "Hiran," she said. Then her eyes went wide with panic. "I should not be talking to you. I should not be resting. I have work to do." "You're hurt," Doyen said, noticing the way she was favoring her left leg. "You should see a doctor." "No," Hiran said quickly. "No doctors, I am fine. I must go." Before Doyen could say anything else, a voice cut through the air like a knife. "Yaron!" They both turned. A tall Velkari male was striding toward them down the hallway. He wore elaborate robes in deep purple and silver, marking him as someone important. His skin patterns glowed bright red with anger. "Ambassador Tarek," Hiran breathed. The fear in her voice made Doyen's stomach tighten. The ambassador reached them in seconds. He completely ignored Doyen and focused his attention on Hiran. "What do you think you are doing?" he demanded. "You are making us look weak in front of the other species. Get up immediately." She fell, Doyen said. She was carrying something too heavy. Ambassador Tarek finally looked at him. His eyes were cold and dismissive. "This does not concern you, human. This is a matter for the Velkari people." "She's injured," Doyen insisted. "She is clumsy," the ambassador said, "and she is embarrassing our species with her weakness. Hiran, pick up your supplies and return to work immediately." Hiran bent down quickly to grab the container. Doyen moved to help her, but she shook her head slightly, warning him off. As she lifted the heavy container, Doyen saw dark bruises on her arms where her sleeves had ridden up. They were in various stages of healing, ranging from fresh purple to faded yellow. His blood ran cold. Hyarin turned and hurried away down the hall, moving as fast as she could while carrying her burden. She didn't look back. Ambassador Tarek gave Doyen one final contemptuous look. In the future, human, do not interfere in matters you do not understand. We Velkari have maintained our social structure for 10,000 years. We do not need advice from a species that has barely left its own star system. The ambassador walked away, his robes swirling behind him. Doyen stood alone in the hallway. His hands were clenched into fists. He looked down at the floor where Hyarin had fallen and saw a small spot of blue blood on the polished surface. She must have scraped her knee when she went down. Other beings continued to pass by, going about their business. None of them had stopped. None of them had cared. This was normal to them, just a servant having trouble. Nothing worth noticing. Doyen picked up his tools slowly. He tried to go back to work on the environmental panel, but his hands weren't steady. He kept seeing Hyarin's frightened eyes. He kept hearing the ambassador's cold voice. He kept thinking about those bruises. After 20 minutes of trying to focus, he gave up. He packed his tools and left the diplomatic wing. But as he walked back to the maintenance section of the station, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. Something was very wrong, and Doyen knew, deep in his gut, that he couldn't just ignore it and move on. He had tried ignoring warning signs before. Back on Earth, he had told himself it wasn't his business, that things would work themselves out. His sister had paid the price for his inaction. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Not here. Not ever again. Doyen couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his small quarters staring at the metal ceiling, while his mind replayed the scene over and over. Hyarin's frightened face, the bruises on her arms, the way everyone had simply walked past without caring. At 3 in the morning, he gave up trying to rest. He sat at his desk and opened his computer terminal. If he was going to do something about this, he needed to understand what he was dealing with. He started searching for information about Velkari culture. What he found made his stomach turn. The Velkari had a rigid social structure that had existed for thousands of years. They divided their people into 5 distinct castes. The highest caste were the administrators and diplomats. The lowest caste were the servants and laborers. The rules were strict and absolute. A person born into the lowest caste could never rise above it. They had few legal rights and were considered property of the higher castes. Doyen read accounts from Velkari history, stories of servants being punished for minor mistakes, records of debts that enslaved entire families for generations, and everywhere the same message: this was tradition. This was how things had always been done. He closed the computer and rubbed his eyes. The words on the screen had made everything worse, not better. The next morning, Doyen went to find Minji. She was a security officer who worked in the station's main control center. They had become friends over the past year, bonding over their shared love of terrible coffee and old Earth movies. He found her at her usual spot, monitoring the security feeds from dozens of cameras throughout the station. "Minji," he said quietly, "can I talk to you about something?" She looked up and immediately noticed his expression. "What's wrong?" Doyen told her everything. The stumbling maid, the ambassador's cold reaction, the bruises he had seen. Minji listened without interrupting, her face growing more serious with each word. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I've seen things like this before," she finally said. "Not just with the Velkari. A lot of species have servants or workers who get treated badly. I tried to report it once when I first got here." "What happened?" Doyen asked. "Captain Rothak told me it wasn't our business. He said every species has the right to maintain their own cultural practices. As long as they're not breaking station regulations, we can't interfere." "But those bruises," Doyen said. "That's not culture. That's abuse." Minji's expression was sad. "I agree with you, but the station operates on diplomatic immunity rules. What happens inside the diplomatic quarters is considered internal to each species. We can't just barge in and arrest someone." Doyen felt frustration building in his chest. "So we just do nothing?" "I didn't say that," Minji replied. "I said we can't do it through official channels. But there are other ways to help, if you're serious about this." Over the next week, Doyen became very serious about it. He changed his work schedule so that he was assigned to the diplomatic wing more often. He volunteered for maintenance calls that no one else wanted. Anything that gave him a reason to be in those hallways. He started seeing Hiren regularly. She was always working. Cleaning floors, carrying supplies, polishing the elaborate decorations. She never seemed to stop. She never seemed to eat. Doyen began leaving food packets in places where she worked. He would set them on windowsills or behind equipment, making it look like someone had forgotten their lunch. He never saw her take them, but they were always gone when he came back. He also kept his eyes open for other things. He documented everything he saw. The long hours Hiren worked. The way Ambassador Tarek and other high-caste Velkhari spoke to her. The injuries that appeared and disappeared on her body. He wasn't the only one watching anymore. Minji had quietly started her own observations. She had access to more of the station and could track movements through the security system. Together they built a picture of what life was like for servants on the station. It was worse than Doyen had imagined. 2 weeks after their first encounter, Doyen witnessed something that changed everything. He was working in a maintenance corridor that ran behind the diplomatic quarters. These corridors were normally empty, used only by workers who needed to access the walls and systems. Sound traveled easily through the thin barriers. He heard glass breaking. Then he heard a sharp crack like something hitting flesh. Doyen moved to a vent that looked into one of the Velkhari apartments. Through the grating, he could see into a large room decorated with expensive furniture. Ambassador Tarek stood in the center of the room. Hiren was on the floor at his feet, one hand pressed to her face. Broken glass sparkled on the floor around her. Worthless, the ambassador said. His voice was perfectly calm, which somehow made it worse. You cannot even carry a simple tray without dropping it. Perhaps I should send you back to Velkhar. Your family's debt could be transferred to your younger sister instead. Hiren looked up with absolute terror in her eyes. Please no. I will do better. I promise. Please do not send me back. The ambassador turned away from her. Clean this up. And if you fail me again, I will consider my options. Doyen's hands were shaking as he backed away from the vent. He had seen enough. He had documented enough. It was time to take this to someone who could actually do something about it. He went straight to Captain Rothak's office. The captain was a large reptilian alien with scales that changed color based on his mood. Right now they were a neutral gray as he listened to Doyen's report. I have evidence of ongoing abuse, Doyen said, pulling up the files he had compiled on his tablet. Physical violence, overwork, denial of basic needs. This is happening right here on the station. Captain Rothak looked at the files without expression. Then he looked at Doyen. These are serious accusations, he said. But they concern matters protected under diplomatic immunity. The Velkhari delegate has the right to manage his household staff according to Velkhari law and custom. But she's being hurt, Doyen insisted. Doesn't that matter? What matters, Captain Rothak said slowly, is that this station serves as a neutral meeting place for hundreds of species. We cannot function if we start imposing the moral standards of one species on all the others. The Velkhari system may seem harsh to humans, but it has maintained order in their society for millennia. So you're not going to do anything? There is nothing I can do within the bounds of station regulations. I am sorry, but my hands are tied. Doyen left the office feeling hollow inside. He walked through the station corridors without really seeing where he was going. His mind kept going back to his sister. Her name had been Soyeon. She had been young and bright and full of life. She had also been in a relationship with someone who hurt her. Doyen had seen the signs. The bruises she tried to hide. The way she flinched at sudden movements. The excuses that never quite added up. But he had told himself it wasn't his place to interfere. She was an adult. She could make her own choices. Things would work themselves out. Then one day things didn't work out. One day he got a call from the hospital. One day it was too late. Doyen stopped walking and leaned against a wall. His eyes were burning. He had sworn after Soyeon's death that he would never stand by and do nothing again. He had promised himself that if he ever saw someone in danger, he would act. But what could he do when the entire system was designed to protect the abusers? He pulled out his communicator and called Minji. I need your help, he said when she answered. And I need to talk to anyone else who might be willing to help. Because the official channels aren't going to work. There was a brief pause. Then Minji said, I know a doctor who's been asking questions. And a few other people. Come to my quarters tonight.
Let's see what we can do. Doyen closed his eyes and took a deep breath.
He was about to cross a line. He was about to go against regulations and potentially risk his job. Maybe worse, but the alternative was doing nothing. And he couldn't do that. Not again. 5 people gathered in Minji's quarters that evening. Besides Doyen and Minji, there was Jiwon, a doctor from the medical bay. There was Jinwoo, another engineer who had worked on the station for 3 years. And there was someone Doyen hadn't expected to see. Commander Yunji was the highest-ranking human officer on Celestial Gateway Station. She was in charge of maintaining relations between the human contingent and the other species. She sat with her arms crossed, listening as Doyun explained everything he had witnessed. "I understand your concerns," Yunji said when he finished, "and I share them. But you need to understand the position we're in. Humans are newcomers to the galactic community. We've only been here for 15 years. Many species still don't trust us. If we start trying to impose our values on others, we risk damaging relationships that took years to build. So we just let it happen," Jinwoo asked. "We just watch people get hurt and do nothing?" "I didn't say that," Yunji replied. "But we need to be smart about this. We can't just march into the diplomatic quarters and demand changes. That will make things worse for everyone, including the person you're trying to help." Jiwon leaned forward. "I've been reviewing medical records. Several servants from different species have come to the medical bay with injuries over the past year. The patterns are consistent with ongoing abuse. But they all refuse to file reports or press charges. They're too afraid. What if we could get one of them to speak up?" Minji suggested. "If we had testimony from someone who was actually experiencing the abuse, that would be different than us making accusations." Doyun thought about Hiran, about the terror in her eyes when Ambassador Tarek threatened to send her back. She's scared. They're all scared, and they have good reason to be. The meeting continued for another hour, but they didn't reach any clear solutions. When everyone left, Doyun felt more frustrated than ever. The next day he made a decision. If the system wouldn't help, he would have to reach Hiran directly. He waited until late in the evening shift when the diplomatic wing was quieter. He had checked the security schedules with Minji. Ambassador Tarek was attending a dinner meeting in another section of the station. Hiran would be alone, finishing her cleaning duties. Doyen found her in one of the conference rooms, wiping down the long table. "Hiran," he said softly from the doorway. She jumped and spun around. When she saw it was him, some of the fear left her face, but not all of it. "You should not be here," she said. "If the ambassador finds out that I spoke with you again, he will be angry." "I know," Doyen said. "But I need to talk to you. I want to help." Hiran shook her head. "You cannot help. No one can help. There are laws," Doyen insisted. "Universal rights for all sentient beings. What he's doing to you is wrong." "It is not wrong in Velkari law," Hiran said quietly. "I am lowest caste. My family owed debts they could not pay. I was sold to Ambassador Tarek to work off those debts. This is normal for my people. But you're being hurt," Doyen said. "I've seen the bruises. I've heard him hit you." Hiran's eyes widened. "You have been spying?" "I've been worried," Doyen corrected. "Look, I know this is complicated, but there are people on this station who want to help. We can get you away from him. We can find you protection." For a moment, something like hope flickered in Hiran's eyes. Then it died. "If I run away, the ambassador will request my return from station authorities. The debt contract is legal under Velkari law and recognized by the galactic treaties. I will be sent back, and then—" She stopped and looked away. "And then it will be much worse. Not just for me. For my family, too. My sister would be forced to take my place." Doyen felt his hope crumbling. "There has to be something we can do." "The kindest thing you can do," Hiran said softly, "is to leave me alone. Your attention makes things worse. The ambassador has noticed that you speak to me. He believes I'm trying to bring shame on him by complaining to others. Please, just let me do my work." Before Doyen could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy footsteps that could only belong to one person. Ambassador Tarek appeared in the doorway. His skin patterns flared bright red. "I knew I would find you here," he said, looking at Doyen. "I have been monitoring the security logs. You seem to spend a great deal of time in this wing, human. More than your maintenance duties require." "I was just checking the environmental controls," Doyen said. "Liar," Tarek said flatly. He turned to Hiran. "What have you been telling him?" "Nothing, Ambassador," Hiran said quickly. "I told him to leave. I told him not to interfere. And yet he keeps coming back." Tarek moved further into the room. You have been accepting his help, haven't you? Taking the food he leaves for you, allowing him to see your failures. No, Ambassador, Tarek's hand moved faster than Doyen could follow. The sharp crack of the slap echoed through the room. Hiren's head snapped to the side and she stumbled backward. Doyen moved without thinking. He stepped between Hiren and the ambassador, his hands up. "Stop," he said firmly. "Don't touch her again." Tarek stared at him with cold fury. "You dare to tell me what I can and cannot do? She is my property, purchased legally according to Velkari law. I can discipline her as I see fit." "Not here," Doyen said. His heart was pounding, but his voice stayed steady. "Not on a station with human jurisdiction. Not in front of me. Your jurisdiction means nothing in diplomatic quarters," Tarek said. "This is Velkari territory under treaty law." "Then maybe those treaties need to change," Doyen said. Tarek smiled coldly. Brave words from a member of a species that practiced slavery itself not so long ago. "You humans have no moral authority to judge anyone." The words hit hard because they were true, but Doyen met the ambassador's eyes anyway. "You're right. Humans have done terrible things. We've hurt each other and enslaved each other and committed atrocities. But that's exactly why I'm not going to stand here and watch it happen again. Because we know where that road leads. We know what it costs." "Inspiring," Tarek said sarcastically. He tapped his communicator. "Security. This is Ambassador Tarek. I have an intruder in my quarters who is refusing to leave and threatening me." "I haven't threatened anyone," Doyen protested. "You placed yourself between me and my property. You prevented me from administering lawful discipline. That constitutes interference and implied threat." Tarek's smile grew wider. "You should have stayed out of matters you do not understand, human." Two security officers arrived within minutes. One was human. One was a multi-limbed species Doyen didn't recognize. The human officer, a woman named Hana, looked uncomfortable when she saw the situation. "Doyen," she said quietly, "you need to come with us." "He hit her," Doyen said, pointing at Hiren. "I watched him do it." "That's a matter for the Diplomatic Review Board," the other security officer said. "Right now you're being charged with trespassing in diplomatic quarters and interfering with internal species matters." They led Doyen away. As he left, he looked back at Hiren. She was standing with her head down, one hand pressed to her reddening cheek. She looked small and defeated, but just before he turned the corner, she looked up. Their eyes met, and Doyen saw something there that hadn't been there before. Not hope exactly, but not complete despair either. Something had changed. Doyen was taken to a holding cell in the security section. Commander Yunji came to see him an hour later. She looked angry and worried in equal measure. "What were you thinking?" she demanded. "I was thinking that someone needed to do something," Doyen said. "And now you're facing formal charges. The Velkari delegation is demanding that you be banned from the diplomatic wing permanently. They might even push for you to be removed from the station entirely." Doyen leaned back against the wall. "Then I guess I messed up." "Yes," Yunji said. "You did." She paused. "But word is spreading fast. Other humans on the station have heard what happened. They're asking questions. They want to know why we're allowing abuse to happen on a station we helped build." "Good," Doyen said. Yunji sighed. "This is going to get complicated. Very complicated. I hope you're ready for what comes next." "I am," Doyen said. He meant it. He had crossed the line. He had made his choice. Now he would face whatever consequences came. But at least he had acted. At least he hadn't looked away. This time he hadn't failed. The news spread through the human community on Celestial Gateway Station like fire through dry grass. By the next morning, everyone knew that Doyen had been arrested for trying to protect an alien servant from abuse. By afternoon, they knew the details. By evening, they were angry. Doyen sat in his holding cell and watched it happen through the small screen on the wall. The station's internal news feed showed what was unfolding outside. Humans were gathering. Not violently, not with weapons or threats. They simply started asking questions. Loud questions. Public questions. Why were servants being abused on the station? Why did diplomatic immunity protect abusers? Why was a man facing charges for trying to help someone who was being hurt? Minji came to visit him in the cell. She wasn't supposed to, but she had friends in security who looked the other way. "You've started something," she said. "People are paying attention now. Jinwoo and some other engineers have been documenting cases of abuse throughout the station. Not just Velkari. Other species too. Shiwan has medical records showing patterns of injury. We're building evidence. Evidence for what? Doyen asked. Captain Rothak already said he can't do anything about it. Maybe he can't, Minji said. But there are other people who can. Commander Yunji is reaching out to the Human Diplomatic Corps, and someone else arrived this morning. A lawyer from Earth. Doyen looked up in surprise. A lawyer? Her name is Sora. She specializes in sentient rights law. Apparently she's been following galactic diplomatic cases for years, looking for a way to challenge some of the more questionable practices. When she heard about your case, she took the first transport out here. The next day, Sora came to see him. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She carried a datapad loaded with documents. Mr. Doyen, she said, sitting across from him, I've reviewed your case. The charges against you are serious, but the circumstances are extraordinary. I believe we can turn this into something bigger than a simple disciplinary hearing. I'm not trying to make this bigger, Doyen said. I just wanted to help Hiron. I understand, Sora said. But we have an opportunity here. The galactic charter that every species signed when they joined the Council includes provisions for basic sentient rights. Those provisions are vague and rarely enforced, but they exist. Your case could force the Council to clarify what those rights actually mean. Over the next week, Sora built her case. She interviewed Minji, Jinwoo, and Jiwon. She collected medical records and security footage. She researched galactic law and found precedents from other stations. Most importantly, she prepared Hyeron to testify. Doyen learned about this from Commander Yunji, who visited him several times. Hyeron had been granted temporary protection by station security while the case was being prepared. Ambassador Tarek had protested loudly, but the station council had overruled him based on emergency provisions in the Galactic Charter. She's terrified, Yunji told Doyen, but she's agreed to speak. I think your actions showed her that not everyone will just look away. The hearing was scheduled for the Grand Assembly Hall, the largest room on the station. It was usually used for major diplomatic conferences. This time, it would host something different. A trial that would determine not just Doyen's fate, but potentially the fate of thousands of servants throughout the galaxy. The day of the hearing arrived. Doyen was brought from his cell and seated at a table next to Sora. The room was packed. Humans filled most of the seats, but there were also aliens from dozens of species. Some looked curious. Others looked angry. At the front of the room sat Elder Counselor Veth, a tall being with translucent skin that showed the light moving through its body. Veth was one of the oldest and most respected figures in the galactic community. It had been chosen to oversee this case because of its reputation for fairness. Ambassador Tarek sat across the room with his own legal team. He looked confident and dismissive. The hearing began with formal charges against Doyen: trespassing, interference with diplomatic immunity, disruption of cultural practices. Then Sora stood up to present her defense. Elder Counselor, she began, the charges against Doyen are factually accurate. He did enter diplomatic quarters. He did interfere with Ambassador Tarek's treatment of his servant. But the question is not whether he did these things. The question is whether he was right to do them. She pulled up images on the large screen behind her. Medical scans showing fractures and bruises. Security footage showing servants being struck or forced to work excessive hours. Testimony from doctors across the station documenting patterns of abuse. These are not isolated incidents, Sora continued. These are systemic practices that exist across multiple species and multiple stations. And they exist in direct violation of Article 7 of the Galactic Charter, which guarantees basic dignity and protection from harm to all sentient beings. Ambassador Tarek's lawyer stood. Article 7 has always been interpreted to respect cultural differences. The Velkari system of indentured servitude has existed for 10,000 years. It is fundamental to our social structure. Longevity does not equal morality, Sora replied. Many species, including humans, have practiced terrible things for thousands of years. We eventually recognize them as wrong and changed. The question is whether the galactic community will do the same. The debate continued for hours. Legal experts on both sides argued about the interpretation of treaties and the balance between cultural respect and universal rights. Finally, Elder Counselor Veth called Hyeron to testify. She walked to the front of the room slowly, her skin patterns flickering with fear. She stood before the council and kept her eyes down. Tell us your experience, Veth said gently. Hyeron spoke quietly at first. She described her life on the Velkari homeworld. The debt her family had incurred. The day she was sold to Ambassador Tarek. The years of work with no rest, little food, and constant punishment for even small mistakes. Her voice got stronger as she spoke. She described the bruises and the fear, the loneliness of knowing that everyone who saw her suffering simply looked away. "I thought this was my fate," she said. "I thought I deserved it because I was lowest caste. But then Doyen helped me. He saw me stumbling and he helped me. Not because he had to. Not because it benefited him. Just because I was struggling." She looked up at the council for the first time, and I realized that if someone from a different species could see my suffering and care about it, maybe it was not something I deserved after all. Maybe it was wrong. The room was silent. Even Ambassador Tarek had no immediate response to that. Finally, Doyen was asked to speak. Sora had prepared a statement for him, but when he stood up, he put it aside. "I'm not a diplomat," he began. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a maintenance worker. I fix things that are broken. And when I see something broken, I can't just walk past it and pretend I don't notice." He looked around the room at all the different species gathered there. "We humans are new to your galactic community. We're still learning your cultures and your customs. But there's one thing we've learned from our own history. Suffering is universal. Pain doesn't need translation. When someone is hurting, you don't need to speak their language to know it's wrong." He paused. "You're right that humans have no moral high ground. We've practiced slavery. We've committed genocides. We've done terrible things to each other. But that's exactly why we can't accept it anymore. 'Cause we know where that road leads. We know the cost of looking away and doing nothing." Doyen's voice grew stronger. "Maybe we don't understand all your cultures. Maybe we're too young to judge your ancient traditions. But if joining this galactic community means accepting cruelty as culture, if it means watching people suffer and calling it respect for diversity, then maybe we joined the wrong community." The room erupted. Some species applauded. Others shouted in protest. Elder Counselor Veth had to call for order several times. When the chaos finally settled, Veth spoke. "This case has raised fundamental questions about how we coexist as a galactic community. Questions we have avoided for too long. I will need time to deliberate and consult with other council members. But I can make one ruling immediately." The Elder Counselor's light pulsed. "While internal cultural practices are generally protected, stations under joint jurisdiction must uphold the core provisions of the Galactic Charter. Article 7 guarantees protection from harm. Therefore, any servant who seeks protection on this station will be granted it, regardless of debt contracts or cultural traditions." Tarek stood up angrily. "This is an outrage. You cannot simply void legal contracts." "I can in matters of basic safety," Veth replied calmly. "And I will. As for the charges against Doyen, I am dismissing them. His actions, while technically violations of protocol, were motivated by the highest principles that this council claims to represent." The Elder Counselor looked around the room. "Let this case serve as a reminder. We are not merely a collection of separate species maintaining our own traditions. We are a community, and communities must have standards that apply to all." The hearing was over. Doyen was free, but more than that, something had changed. A door had been opened. A question had been raised that could no longer be ignored. As he left the assembly hall, dozens of humans came up to shake his hand or pat his shoulder. But the moment that mattered most came. 6 months passed. Doyen stood at his usual spot in the maintenance bay, organizing tools for the day's work. The station hummed around him with the familiar sounds of life and activity. On the surface, everything looked the same as it had before. But underneath, everything had changed. The door opened and Minji walked in, carrying 2 cups of terrible coffee. She handed one to Doyen and leaned against the workbench. "Another transport is arriving today," she said. 7 more asylum seekers from different species. That makes 43 this month." Doyen took a sip of the bitter coffee and smiled. "The network is spreading." After the hearing, word had traveled fast through the galaxy. Servants on other stations, other worlds, had heard about the precedent set on Celestial Gateway. They had heard about the human who refused to look away, about the servant who spoke up, about the council ruling that protection was available, and they had started coming. It wasn't a flood. The galactic community was enormous, and changing ancient practices took time. But it was a start, a ripple spreading outward from one moment, one choice, one refusal to accept suffering as normal. Yaren had become the face of that movement. She worked now as a translator and advocate, helping other refugees navigate the complex process of seeking asylum. She had learned 5 new languages and was working on a 6th. Her apartment was always full of people who needed help, or just someone to talk to who understood what they had been through. Doyen had visited her apartment last week. The walls were covered with drawings and messages from the people she had helped. One drawing showed a human figure reaching out a hand to a falling figure. Underneath, someone had written in careful English, "Someone saw. Someone cared." "Commander Yunji wants to see you," Minji said, pulling Doyen back to the present. "Something about a new project." Doyen finished his coffee and headed to the commander's office. He had been there many times over the past months, usually to discuss the asylum program or handle diplomatic complaints. Some species were angry about the changes. They claimed humans were destroying the galactic order and imposing their values on others. But other species had been quietly supportive. Some had even started implementing similar protections on their own stations. Commander Yunji looked up when Doyen entered. She gestured to a chair. "I have news," she said. "The Galactic Council has created a new position. Special Advocate for Sentient Rights. It's a small office with limited power, but it's a start. They want someone to investigate complaints and help coordinate asylum programs across different stations." "That's good," Doyen said. "Minji has been offered the position," Yunji continued. "She's perfect for it. She has security experience, she knows the station systems, and she's been at the center of this from the beginning." Doyen smiled. "She'll be great at it." "She wants you to join her team," Yunji said. "Not officially. You'd still be listed as a maintenance engineer, but you'd work with her on cases. Your ability to connect with people, to see what others miss, that's valuable." Doyen thought about it. Part of him wanted to just go back to his quiet life of fixing broken equipment, but he knew that wasn't possible anymore. He had seen too much. "Understood too much, I'll do it," he said. That afternoon, Doyen took some personal time. He went to the observation deck, a large room with windows looking out at the stars. Earth was visible in the distance, a small blue dot among billions of others. He thought about his sister, Soyun, about all the times he had seen the warning signs and done nothing, about the guilt he had carried for years. He couldn't bring her back. He couldn't change the past, but maybe he had finally learned the lesson her death had tried to teach him. Looking away didn't make the suffering stop. It just meant you stopped seeing it. "I didn't look away this time," he said quietly to the distant blue dot. "I hope that counts for something." The door opened behind him. He turned to see an unexpected visitor. Ambassador Tarek stood in the doorway. He looked different than Doyen remembered. Thinner, tired. His elaborate robes had been replaced with simpler clothes. "I wondered if I would find you here," Tarek said. Doyen tensed. The ambassador had been recalled to the Velkari homeworld after the hearing. There had been rumors of disgrace, of his family losing status. Doyen hadn't expected to see him again. "What do you want?" Doyen asked. Tarek walked to the window and looked out at the stars. "I have been sent back to this station, not as an ambassador, as a junior trade liaison, a significant demotion." "I'm sorry," Doyen said, though he wasn't sure if he meant it. "Don't be," Tarek replied. "I deserved worse." He was quiet for a moment. "The incident here, your actions, they caused ripples on my homeworld." Young Velkari began asking questions about the caste system, demanding changes. My family, which had maintained its status through traditional methods, found itself on the wrong side of a cultural shift. Doyen didn't know what to say. Tarek turned to face him. "I hated you for what you did. I blamed you for destroying my position and my family's standing. But then something happened. My daughter, who had always been destined for high caste, asked me a question." "What question?" "She asked me if I would want her to be treated the way I treated Hyerin. If she was born into a different family, a lower caste, would I accept someone hurting her and calling it tradition?" Tarek's expression was complicated. "I could not answer her. And in that moment I understood that you did not destroy my world. I had been living in a world that deserved to be destroyed. I didn't do it to hurt you," Doyen said. "I just couldn't watch her suffer." "I know," Tarek said. "That is what made it so powerful. You did not act from hatred or superiority. You acted from simple compassion. And that is harder to argue against than any law or treaty." The former ambassador moved toward the door, then paused. "I came to tell you that there are Velkari working for reform now. progressive voices that were always there but never listened to. Your actions gave them courage to speak. Change will be slow. My people are stubborn, but it has begun. After Tarek left, Doyen stood alone at the window for a while longer. He thought about ripples spreading outward, about how one choice, one moment of caring could cascade into something larger than anyone intended. His communicator beeped. It was a message from Minji. We have a situation. Indentured worker from the Talvian delegation requesting help. He's scared to come forward. Can you talk to him? People trust you. Doyen looked out at the stars one more time. Then he typed his response. On my way. As he walked through the station corridors, he passed Hiran going the other direction. She was with 3 other refugees explaining something about station protocols. When she saw Doyen, she waved. He waved back. They didn't need to say anything. They both understood. The work continued. The ripples continued spreading. Doyen reached the counseling office where the Talvian worker was waiting. The alien was small and covered in soft fur, his large eyes filled with fear. When Doyen entered, the worker flinched. It's okay, Doyen said gently. My name is Doyen. I'm here to help. They told me you helped others, the Talvian said in broken English. They told me you see us, the ones others ignore. I see you, Doyen said. Tell me what's wrong. As the Talvian began to speak, sharing his story of abuse and fear, Doyen listened. Really listened. He documented everything. He asked careful questions. He made no promises he couldn't keep, but he made one promise he always kept. I won't look away, he said. I promise you that. Later that evening, after the Talvian worker had been moved to safe housing, Doyen returned to his quarters. He was exhausted but not empty. There was a difference now between being tired from ignoring problems and being tired from facing them. He sat at his desk and looked at the photos on the wall. There was one of Soyeon, smiling in the sunlight. Next to it now was a new photo. It showed Hiran and several other refugees at a celebration they had held last month. They were all smiling, all free. Doyen touched the photo of his sister gently. I'm trying, he said. Every day I'm trying to be the person who acts instead of the person who looks away. His communicator beeped again. Another message from Minji. Good work today. Get some rest. We have 3 more cases tomorrow. Doyen smiled and sent back a simple response. Ready? He turned off the lights and lay down. As he drifted toward sleep, he thought about the question Hiran had asked him once. She had wanted to know why humans were different, why they couldn't just accept things the way they were. He had told her the truth. Humans weren't special. They had done terrible things throughout their history. They had enslaved each other, hurt each other, destroyed each other, but maybe, just maybe, that dark history had taught them something important. It had taught them to recognize suffering. It had taught them that tradition was not the same as morality. It had taught them that looking away, staying silent, following orders, respecting authority. None of those things were excuses for allowing cruelty to continue. Humanity's gift to the galaxy wasn't superior technology or military strength. It was something simpler and more powerful. It was the stubborn refusal to accept that suffering was inevitable, the inconvenient insistence that kindness mattered, the difficult choice to care, even when caring was complicated and messy and caused problems. In short, it was the willingness to see someone stumbling and reach out a hand. That was enough to change the galaxy.